and recruiting interesting and hopefully local people. And Kim Ogle came forward. Many of you know her from her work in the funeral business here in Oxford. And her credentials went out, but I'll just give you a little bit of what went out in the earlier email. Um, she earned her PhD from Miami in the Department of Sociology and Gerontology, studying end-of-life issues for older adults. The title of her dissertation was Waiting to Die, an exploratory study of older adults in hospice care. And after she got her PhD, she was awarded a postdoctoral fellowship with Scripps Gerontology here at Miami. During that time, she developed curriculum end of life care for certified nursing assistants who work in long-term care facilities. And in 2019, she earned the certificate of death doula from the Conscious Dying Institute in Boulder, Colorado. And she recently maintained her roots in Oxford by opening her company called A Pathway Home. So Kim, if you'd like to take it over.
Sure. All right. Well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me to speak with you today. I think it's a very important topic and something I'm very passionate about. Most of you know me from my previous position as a funeral director. And when I left the position, it was really a very difficult transition for me. I enjoyed serving the people of Oxford and helping them as through a very, very difficult time. And so since I came back, I earned my PhD, and I've been continuing to think about how best to serve the community of Oxford and the people that I care about. I've lived here all of my life. I've got deep roots here, and I would be remiss if I didn't give a shout out to my grandfather, who I'm sure is smiling in heaven that the Dodgers won the World Series last night. So I have to give a shout out to that. And, you know, with COVID and Zoom, this is a new way of presenting, and I'm sure he would be saying, you know, just step up to the plate, Sam, and give it a mighty swing. So, but here I am, and I decided to open up this business dealing with end-of-life issues. You know, it's something we all have to face. It's not a topic any of us really wants to talk about, but the more we talk about it, the less frightening and the less scary it is. And the more we can plan for it, that way we know it gives us a little bit of control over something we really have no control over at the end of life. And so my business, A Pathway Home, what I do is I hope to provide end-of-life education to people, as well as after a death occurs, do some grief support, because it's a very, very difficult time. So I've divided my business up into three areas that I feel I'm have some expertise in. I've done a lot of studying in this area. Besides keeping up with my funeral directing, I'm still a licensed funeral director and embalmer. But I just decided that after doing it for over 20 some years, I wanted to, you know, you do the funeral and then it's over, and there are people surrounding the deceased and the family, and then everybody leaves, and there's a lot of grief that happens after that. So I wanted to be able to connect with people even longer. But I've kind of looked at this in three different segments. And the first segment I look at is life. As we're living, what can we do to prepare ourselves for this end of life, and as we go through this journey? And one of that is making healthcare decisions. And most of us have done this during estate planning, and you know, you have living wills, and these are things that are taken care of. But sometimes it needs to go a little bit further than that. And some of that is making decisions about DNRs, do not resuscitate. And that's not really covered in living wills. And again, these are difficult things to talk about, but if you're in a situation and all of a sudden, and we as a nation are facing this so often now, is we're fine one day and the next day your spouse or your brother or sister has COVID and is on life support, and now you're making decisions and you hadn't talked to them about what those decisions might be. I'll give you a personal example. This happened with my mother. She had a devastating stroke. She was on life support and we had to make a decision. And luckily our family were all on board about what kind of life my mother would want to live. But these are important discussions to have, and these discussions need to happen. You know, bicycle accidents, Bill, those happen, you know, totally unexpected. And those are important discussions to have. They're hard discussions, but there are some tools that I might be able to help a family with to open up that discussion, to make it a little less difficult. That I might be able to give some hints about that. I can even talk about in my role as a funeral director. Today, we are doing funerals differently than ever before because of COVID. Again, it's great to have these discussions ahead of time so that you can plan and you know, and I can kind of help facilitate some of that. I plan funerals and memorials for over 20 years. I know the ins and outs, and sometimes it's easier to go in to the funeral home already having things in mind, rather than all of a sudden you're blindsided and you've got to make decisions in a matter of hours. I always say funeral directing is a little bit like wedding planning. Only wedding planning, you get to have at least a year, sometimes 2 years to make those plans. If you're making funeral or memorial plans before COVID, these took place in 3 days, 3 to 4 days. And it's the same thing. You've got to get a minister, you have to have a church, you have to make decisions on if it's a full casket, if it's going to be cremation, if it's going to be, you know, what kind of disposition you're going to have, where the person's going to be buried. There's just so many decisions to make. I once read in my funeral directing coursework that, you know, in a matter of a day, you have to make 50 to 75 decisions, and you're not thinking clearly. Many times you're exhausted after caregiving for someone for a number of days or weeks or months, and now all of a sudden you're confronted with some decisions. So my hope is that I could help people ahead of time sit down and maybe think about some of those things and prompt you in thinking about some of those things that you might want, or your loved one or your spouse or your family might want at the end of life. The other thing and part of this is, and I'm working with a client right now who is going through a life review as part of her end of life. She's going through old photos, and her spouse recently died, but she's sort of going down memory lane. And she said, and she's commented a couple times, you know, this is so good because it's bringing up memories. Some of them are good or some of them are bad, but some of them I can just put them away. It's good. I can get rid of that. I don't need to think about that anymore. That was in the past. I feel really good. This whole idea of reconciling with some of your past. Some people feel the need to do that before they feel that they can leave this good earth. And so I have some experience in helping people go through that. Also, as you are living, if your spouse or someone close to you is gotten a diagnosis of a terminal illness, you go through anticipatory grief and what that might be like. So there's a number of things I think we don't often think about. for the living as we're going through all of this. And so I'm hoping that I could be a resource for people and help them through some of these very difficult times. The other part of what I do is the death part, and that has to do a lot with helping people understand hospice. I know, Bill, you talked about you had a wonderful experience with hospice. I think the idea of hospice is fantastic. What it set out to do and what Dame Cicely Saunders started in England, and it came to the United States in the early 70s. And we've had it here for over 40 years, and people still truly don't understand what hospice, what services they provide, and what it really does. And people often hear hospice, and it's like, oh, that's the word I don't want to hear. My loved one is ready for hospice care. Well, hospice can provide at least 6 months, oftentimes more, of support services for the family and for the person who has a diagnosis or a prognosis of a terminal illness. It's not just that week to 10 days prior to death. And I think that's something that people truly don't understand about hospice. They can provide support, and it's not just for the person who is ill. They also can provide respite for the people, for the caregivers. They can provide education as to what the timeline might be for this illness. What are some of the things that the person needs to look for comfort care to make sure the person is getting the comfort that they need. So hospice is a very valuable resource. It is, in the 1980s, it became part of a Medicare benefit, so families don't have to pay for that. There also is some misunderstanding about what hospice doesn't do. And when hospice first came into the United States, and we first had hospice, they did provide 24-hour care. And some hospices now will still do that. But like anything else, hospice has a hard time getting people, STNAs, state-tested nursing assistants, to do that work. They can't always provide that. And so those are things that I can help people, guide people through that. The other thing about hospice is, unfortunately, it is a money-making entity. It is a business. And so there are good hospices out there that provide wonderful care. I have talked to people that unfortunately have not had that experience, and they've had very difficult times with hospice. And people don't understand that you get to choose which hospice you go to. And if you don't like the one that you're in, you have agency and can change hospice. So, I think that there's a lot to navigate, and I have I sit on the board of the Hospice of Hamilton, and I've sat in on some of lots of their training programs, but I've been out in the field listening to them explain hospice to patients that are about to enter into their program. And quite frankly, I've gone back and told them that they've not done a very good job explaining this. And so I'm trying to help them educate people more about hospice. Another big word that's being thrown out there is palliative care. So what is palliative care, and what's the difference between palliative care and hospice care? Well, all palliative care is a part of hospice, but palliative care can also be, it is comfort care. So if you have cancer and you're going through treatment and you're miserable and you're not getting the proper care, you can talk to a palliative care specialist. And it's becoming more and more prevalent, but it's sort of a new area of medicine right now, that it works with your doctors to try and keep you as comfortable as possible. But it's not hospice. You don't have to be in hospice to have palliative care. And I urge anyone that has any procedures that are major procedures, or an illness that is any type of very long-term illness, to get a palliative care consult so that you understand to be as comfortable as possible. I can also teach people at the end of life how to sit vigil, how to be there with your loved ones. I mentioned that hospice sometimes will no longer give the 24-hour care. So that leaves family members to be there at the end of life. And that can be a very frightening and burdensome proposition to a family member. And I can help you go through that, help you think about things that might help you as the caregiver and help the dying person and what that might be. And so that it makes it more comfortable, because it is so stressful. If any of you have been through it, you know it's very, very stressful. So I'm willing to offer, right now I'm not willing to sit vigil. I certainly have done it for family members. I've done it for close friends of mine. But it's a very private and intimate time. And it's very important for family if they can be there to do that. And I can teach you how to make it as best as possible for both the dying person and the person that's doing the sitting and caregiving, because it can be quite frightening. And part of what I would teach you what are the signs and symptoms. I just talked to someone the other day that told me, we had hospice care, but they told us nothing about what to look for. I had no idea that the person that was dying might be very restless and want to get out of bed all the time. And that this is called terminal restlessness. And it's something that happens quite often as a person is making that very difficult transition from life to death. So I am more than willing to sit down with people, explain all of this so that we can make this less frightening and better for families and better for the person who's transitioning. Also, self-care is very important if you are caregiving for something or for someone. Self-care is so important, because you have to take care of yourself in order to take care of the person that is transitioning. One of the most difficult things that a person does is caregive for a loved one. I've seen it happen in the funeral business. It happened in my own family, where the caregiver actually runs themselves down and they end up going downhill and dying actually before the person that they were caregiving for. And that happens. That happened with my uncle. So teaching a person how to do self-care, they can be very simple things, but important things to help you through that. And finally, losing someone, it's someone that you have loved, someone that you've spent years with. It's so difficult. And we as a society, it's so difficult, we don't like to talk about it. And family and friends will rush to your side when the death happens. And we see this, and it's a great thing when we are able to have funerals. Now in the time of COVID, it's a little different, but which is a whole nother issue that we're dealing with right now. But the grief that comes after, it's difficult, and it's a huge loss. And a lot of times we find ourselves alone with that grief. People don't know what to say to you. They don't know what words to say. They don't know how to truly comfort you, and or just to sit with you. And one of the things that I've been doing with a number of people now is allowing them just to sit and talk and talk about their grief and help them understand that this is normal grieving. You don't get over it in 2 to 3 weeks or 2 to 3 months. Grief is a long-lasting part of our life. And we all experience grief all the time. You know, even in this time of COVID, we've all experienced grief of not being able to go to that grandchild's birthday party, not being able to maybe attend a wedding, not being able to do certain things. Those are all these little griefs that we are kind of going through, and you think, it's hard, but it's okay. But when you lose someone, it's very difficult. So I'm here to help you through that. Pet loss. Right now, the profession that has the #1 suicide rate are veterinarians. And part of that is because they see the heartbreak of families all the time when they have to put their pets down. Pet loss is a huge area of grief, and it's sort of an unrecognized grief area that we don't really talk about too much. Pets are part of our family, and they become part of our family, and sometimes they are so important because they are that unconditional love that are always happy to see you when you come in. They never criticize you for not wearing the right thing, and they are always right there with you. So I'm offering to help people sift through that, through the loss of a pet, through secondary losses. Some of you are living at the Knolls, moving from your home of many years to the Knolls is a loss. I'm going through that with my father. He's getting a little bit more feeble. He's not as independent as he used to be, even though he's trying hard to still be independent. Those little losses add up. So I'm hoping to be able to help explain these losses, as well as help people understand them and understand what grief is. And grief really, especially when we're talking about the grief of the loss of a loved one, is directly related to love. And I think it's really important to always remember that the depth of your love for someone and the depth of your grief can go hand in hand. So in opening this business, I really wanted just to find a way to give back to the Oxford community in a way that I have some expertise in an area that I've done a great deal of study in, and my job, my working as a funeral director for over 20 years, met with a lot of people, a lot of different circumstances, and it's helped me grow, and it's helped me see a need that we have here in our community. And I'm hoping that I can be a service to people, and that's really why I'm doing this, is to be a service to the people of Oxford. So with that, I think I may have even gone over my time a bit, but if people have questions, I'd be more than happy to help and answer anything that you might have.
Yeah, Kim, this is Lee. I recently had introduced to me by a friend a type of insurance that I knew very little about. And this insurance was to cover expenses if you die in a place other than where you're going to be buried. Could you talk about that insurance and what it costs?
Yeah. So is this insurance, say, if you are traveling and you pass away?
Yes.
Is that, yes?
Or if you're in another country. I know somebody was out of the country and they passed away, and they had those expenses covered by this insurance policy.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a new one. I have not heard of that before. I know that we, as a funeral, when I was working there, we had to do that quite often. And I would say, as I also say with people who are thinking about prepaying funeral expenses, if if you feel that you need to do that to make sure you have that money set aside for that, then go ahead and do that. Otherwise, in my experience, and I'm not really familiar with this, Lee, this type of insurance, but generally, if you set aside or have money in a 401k or an IRA or something like that, you generally can have that money earning more interest than with a funeral or than with an insurance company. I'm always a little leery about that. And I say the same thing. And I used to sell funeral home insurance and funeral expense pre-need insurance. And I often would tell people, you know what? Unless you need to set this aside for Medicare or something, you keep your money, keep it invested, and you'll be fine with that.
Could you, I know this is a far-ranging question, but is there an average funeral cost in Oxford versus an average funeral cost in North Carolina, where Tim happens to be?
Mm-hmm.
What are people generally looking at expense-wise now for a funeral?
Well, I can tell you nationwide, the average cost of a funeral is $8,000 to $10,000. Okay, and that is a full burial funeral. I have to say, you know, I would suggest looking around in the Oxford area. You know, my dad and I's name is still out here on the pike, but I will tell you they're a little expensive, honestly. I'll be quite honest with you with that. They are a little expensive. I think you know, you might want to look around. But $8,000 to $10,000 for a full burial. Cremation is much less expensive than a full burial. And I will tell you, right now in Oxford, I can tell you this, we are at 70% cremation rate. And for many, many years, they predicted that we would be in the year 2025 in the United States, we would have a 30% cremation rate. They have changed that actually because of one, cost, two, COVID is definitely driving cremation rate. Nationwide, it's closer to 65% cremation rate right now in the nation.
Beth, it's Betsy.
Yeah.
I know who your grandfather is.
Yes.
We went to high school together, but I'm not sure everybody on the call does. So I wondered if you could tell them a little bit about your grandpapa.
Sure. My grandfather was Walter Alston. He managed the Los Angeles Dodgers for 23 years. I can proudly say he managed to win 4 World Series and 7 pennants back in the day. He managed the Brooklyn Dodgers back before they went to LA. And so, yes, I'm still a Dodger fan. I used to know everyone in the Dodger organization. I know no one now, and I still am a Dodger fan. So thank you, Betsy.
That's great.
Yeah.
Hey, Kim,
Yes.
could you tell us about your grandfather's book that he wrote after being manager of the Brooklyn, then LA Dodgers for 24 years? Can you tell us about that book?
Sure, 1 year at a time.
Yeah.
Yes, he signed 1-year contracts. He never signed more. In fact, 1 year he managed without a contract until almost the end of the season. He said, you know, if they don't want me, but they had this working relationship. So 1 year at a time, 1 contract at a time. It was a different era of baseball, but and I feel very fortunate that I was able to grow up in baseball during that time. But yeah, no multi-year deals for him, that's for sure. He grew up around here, for those of you that don't know. And he's a proud Miami alum himself. He played baseball and basketball for Miami. Grew up in this area, lived in Dartown from 1951 until he passed away. So Yeah, I have great memories. I was truly blessed. Yeah, that's a talk for another time. I'll be glad to give that talk sometime too.
But Kimberly, I just want to ask if you saw Sandy Koufax pitch many
Absolutely.
times.
Yes,
Oh, wow.
absolutely.
That
Yeah.
would have been so cool. But
Oh
they
my
didn't
goodness.
need him. They didn't need him this year.
I know. Yeah, Sandy Koufax, Don Drysdale. Yeah, fortunately, Claude Osteen. Yep.
Yeah, cool. Very cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I used to spend, I would go to spring training when I was in high school, junior high and high school, and even elementary school. I used my spring break to go to spring training, and then would spend usually a good month or so out in LA and go to Dodger Stadium and watch all the games.
Kim, this is Lee again. You might tell
Sure.
people where your office is. They may
Sure.
have overlooked that.
Yes, and I have a brochure that I sent to Lee, and perhaps he'll send this out. I don't know. You can,
Yeah, it
probably
came
it's
out.
backwards, but yeah, I have an office. It's on Morning Sun Road. I have a phone number. It's 796-0218. That if you have a call that phone number. I am getting a website up. It will be a Pathway Home Oxford. It's under construction, but it is up. You can Google that, and it's up there. So my office is on Morning Sun Road. I'm not there unless I have to be, but best way is to contact me is my phone number. Again, 796-0218.
Hey, Kim, can I ask one more question?
Absolutely.
How did you, or maybe it was your father that encouraged you to get into the funeral director business? But, Harry, your dad, wasn't in that originally. He was in the banking business, then went into the funeral director business. So why'd you follow that pathway in your career?
Yeah, it's about helping people. And again, why I'm doing this, I was teaching school actually, and was thinking about actually going into grief counseling at that time, watching my dad do what he was doing. He had just gotten into the funeral business, and it was kind of unheard of there. And as everything else in my life, it took me a while to come around to getting to hear that it was all about being there for people in their time of need and doing what I can to help them through that terrible time. Funeral directing, honestly, I liked what I was doing. The thing for me is it became a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week job because I wanted to care so much for the people. If it's my day off and if it's my day, for example, Bob, if it's my day off and something happened to your mother-in-law, I would have to be there, and I found myself, I got burned out because it was 24/7 for me. I would go weeks and weeks and never have a day off, and that's not healthy. And then we ended up selling, and things changed, and funeral industry has changed too. So what I'm doing now, I love, I'm passionate about it. And the more I can help people, that's what I feel good about.
Can we have one more question? Or do we have one more question, I should say? Bill, I think you're trying to, you need to unmute. Let's see here. Dennis, can you see Bill to unmute him?
Now, can you hear me?
Yes.
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 Kim, I just wanted to ask you if you've ever read the poem To Smokey Austin by Marianne Moore. There's a very fine poem. She was a really famous poet. I often taught her poetry.
Mhm.
When the Brooklyn Dodgers left Brooklyn to go to Los Angeles, she had been a faithful subscriber to the Dodgers all that time. She wrote a poem, you might like to look it up, called
Okay.
Hometown Peace for Messrs. Alston and Reese.
Oh, okay. Yes.
It's very good, and it's got humor because she was a humorous poet, but
Uh-huh.
very fine. And Marianne Moore is one of the notable American poets.
I'm going to write that down. I'm going to look it up.
Yeah, look it up. Just look up
I-
Marianne Moore, and
Okay.
you can
I
get a
sure
list of-
will. Yes. So, well, thank you. And thank you all for sharing time with me today. I really appreciated the opportunity to be able to tell you what I'm doing. And, you know, it's one of those things, I would love to see you, but on the other hand, I don't want to see you. So, but I would love to help educate you so that we can all face this ultimate time the best way we can.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Kim, thank you so much for this, everybody. We will be
Yes.
putting a book in the Lane Library in honor of your talk. And I'm going to ask Lee to make sure that we get your brochure out to all of our members.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll take care of it.
Or some technological thing that we do.
Yeah,
here.
Dennis and I will take care of that.